Welcome to the deep dive. I'm incredibly excited you could join us today because we have a genuinely fascinating mission ahead of us.
We really do.
Yeah, we are going to be unpacking this massive, thought-provoking stack of notes, historical anecdotes, and just these really deep philosophical observations, all centered around the concepts in a book by Ryan Holiday called Ego is the Enemy.
It's a fantastic stack of material to go through.
It is. And to kick things off, I actually want to pose a question directly to you, the listener. It's something I think, well, absolutely everyone has pondered at some point, whether you're looking at celebrities, politicians, or even just people in your own office.
Right, we see it everywhere.
Have you ever wondered why some incredibly talented, undeniably brilliant people spectacularly self-destruct, while others, sometimes with even less raw talent, steadily rise to the top and somehow manage to stay there?
It's the ultimate question.
What is that unseen force that derails so much human promise?
That is the perfect question to frame our entire discussion today. And to answer it, we really have to define exactly what this enemy is from the very outset.
Yeah, because the word gets thrown around a lot.
Exactly. Now, I want to be crystal clear about what this deep dive is not focusing on. When we start throwing around the word ego, we are not talking about the clinical Freudian concept.
Right. No psychoanalysis today.
No, we aren't getting into Freud's complex analogy of the ego acting as the rider on a horse, desperately trying to direct our unconscious primal animal drives. Instead, we are talking about the casual, everyday definition of the word.
The one we all recognize.
Yes. We're talking about an unhealthy belief in our own importance, arrogance, self-centered ambition. It is essentially that petulant child living inside every single person that chooses getting its own way over anything else, regardless of the consequences.
This is blind selfishness, basically.
Pretty much. It's the sense of superiority and absolute certainty that far, far exceeds the actual bounds of our confidence and our talent. This everyday manifestation of ego is the enemy of building something great. It's the enemy of maintaining success once you actually achieve it. And perhaps most importantly, it is the absolute enemy of recovering from failure.
It really is that insidious voice in the back of your head that tells you you're better than you really are, or that you deserve more than you've actually earned.
That's a great way to put it.
And what I found so compelling while reading through these notes is how the overarching theory is grounded in a very painful reality. The notes detail a cautionary tale from the author's own life that proves we aren't just dealing with abstract philosophy here.
No, this is coming from someone who has been deep in the trenches.
Absolutely. He describes this absolute meteoric rise in his youth. We're talking about dropping out of college at 19 because he was handed these life-changing opportunities. He becomes the youngest executive at a Beverly Hills talent agency.
Which is practically unheard of.
Completely. Then he's directing marketing for American Apparel back when it was arguably one of the hottest, most culturally relevant brands in the entire world.
Oh, you're everywhere.
By the time he was 25, he had already published a controversial best-selling book. He had accumulated serious influence, a massive platform, and significant resources. From the outside, it looked like the ultimate success story.
It really did. But then comes the crash. And this is where the reality of ego truly sets in. Because when you experience that kind of massive early success, the overwhelming temptation is to start telling yourself and everyone else a highly mythologized story about your own Herculean struggle and undeniable genius.
You start believing your own hype.
Exactly. But in these reflections, there's a brutal admission of what the reality actually looked like when the ego took over. Within a devastating 6-month period, the wheels completely came off.
It's hard to read, honestly.
American Apparel teetered on the very edge of total bankruptcy, saddled with hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. The founder, who was his idol and mentor, was unceremoniously fired and literally ended up sleeping on a friend's couch.
From CEO to a couch.
Yeah. The Beverly Hills talent agency, where he originally started, was being sued and was completely imploding. Another mentor he deeply relied on completely unraveled. Everything around him was turning to ash.
And the craziest part is that it wasn't just the people around him collapsing. He was internally self-destructing.
He's completely burning out.
He describes finding himself back in the city where he started, impossibly stressed, chronically overworked, and completely unable to just say no to money or prestige. There is this one harrowing detail in the notes that really stuck with me.
The Wi-Fi incident.
Yes. He describes arriving back at his house after weeks of grueling travel on the road, and he has a severe, crippling panic attack for one simple reason: the Wi-Fi wasn't working.
Just a broken internet connection.
He was literally terrified, repeating this mantra in his head. If I don't send these emails, if I don't send these emails. He was so relentlessly wound up, so consumed by his own self-importance and the perceived weight of his tasks, that his future wife actually walked out the door because he simply wasn't the person he used to be.
It took a massive personal toll.
He ended up being taken to the emergency room after a very public evisceration by someone he deeply looked up to. His own company tore itself to pieces not once, but twice. It is a stunning portrait of the destructive power of ego when it goes completely unchecked.
It's a phenomenal example because it illustrates how ego functions almost like a disease. There's a brilliant comparison in the research from the pioneering CEO Harold Jean, who actually likened egoism to alcoholism.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
He pointed out that the egotist doesn't stumble around knocking things off a desk or slurring their words. Instead, they become increasingly arrogant. And the dangerous part is that people around them initially mistake that arrogance for a genuine sense of power and self-confidence.
So they enable it.
They reward it. But underneath that facade, the person is psychologically and emotionally dying. So to combat this incredibly common disease, the framework we're looking at today provides a clear blueprint organized into 3 distinct phases that every single one of us cycles through in life: aspire, success, and failure.
Makes sense.
Think about it. We are aspiring until we succeed until we eventually fail or aspire to something even more, and after we fail, we have to begin the process of aspiring all over again. It is a continuous loop.
Okay, let's unpack this because trying to tackle all 3 of those massive phases at once would be overwhelming. So, for today's deep dive, we are going to focus entirely on that first, highly crucial phase, aspire.
The beginning of the journey.
Exactly. We are going to look at exactly how to manage the ego when you were just setting out to achieve something great, when you were standing at the absolute bottom of the mountain looking up at the peak. And looking through these materials, it seems the very first trap we need to discuss is one that is incredibly prevalent in the modern world: the extreme danger of talk and the illusion of progress.
Oh, this is a big one.
Because let's be honest, right now, our culture actively fans the flames of our ego. It has literally never been easier to just puff ourselves up to an audience of thousands.
That is undeniably true. Our technology is constantly, almost aggressively, prompting us to talk about ourselves. You open Facebook, and the very first thing it asks is, what's on your mind? Twitter, or X, beckons you to compose a new post. Instagram wants your visual narrative.
Just begging for our input.
These are literally blank spaces begging to be filled with our passing thoughts, our highly curated photos, and our grand, sweeping plans for the future. We are constantly urged by society to broadcast our goals to the world, to dare greatly in public, and to share our boldest visions before we've taken a single step to achieve them.
But the sources show that's a trap.
Yes. When we look historically at the research, we can see exactly how dangerous this urge to talk can actually be. There is a fascinating case study in the notes about the author and activist Upton Sinclair.
Right, from the 1930s.
In 1934, Sinclair decided to launch a highly untraditional campaign for the governor of California. Now, he knew his absolute best asset was his writing ability, so he took a very unusual, very audacious step. Before the election even happened, he published a short book titled I, Governor of California, and How I Ended Poverty.
Wait, I had to read that section of the notes twice when I first saw it. He actually wrote the book in the past tense.
In the past tense.
As if he had already won the election and completely enacted all of his major policies.
Precisely. He outlined all of his brilliant, sweeping policies as if they were already established historical facts. And from a publishing standpoint, the book was a massive bestseller. People loved the vision.
But the election itself?
It was an absolute unmitigated failure. He lost the election by roughly 250,000 votes.
250,000.
And what is truly revealing is what political observers at the time noted about his behavior. Sinclair's friend, Carrie McWilliams, wrote that Sinclair not only realized he was going to be defeated as the campaign wore on, but he actually seemed to have completely lost interest in the campaign itself.
He just gave up.
He stopped fighting for it. Why? Because in his vivid imagination and through the process of writing that book, he had already acted out the part of the governor. He had already received the applause, the accolades, and the bestseller status for his grand ideas. So, psychologically speaking, why bother to do the grueling, unglamorous work of actually enacting it in real life?
That is wild. His talk completely got out ahead of his actual campaign, and his fundamental will to bridge the gap between his vision and reality just collapsed.
It sapped his drive entirely.
And I think what's so scary is that this isn't just some historical political anomaly. This is a daily trap for creatives, entrepreneurs, and frankly, anyone trying to start something new today.
Right.
There's a deeply relatable modern example in the research concerning the writer Emily Gould.
The book deal story.
Yeah. She had landed this massive six-figure book deal to write a novel. It's the dream scenario for a writer. But then she spent 2 entire years completely stuck. And when you look at why, it wasn't a lack of ideas. It was because she spent a whole year, in her own words, tumbling, tweeting, and scrolling.
Being busy without doing the work.
She rationalized it to herself. She justified it by saying she was building her brand, that updating her blog was a creative act, that engaging with her audience was part of the modern author's job. But the actual novel, the difficult, lonely work she was supposed to do, stalled completely.
It is a trap that is deeply rooted in human psychology. This mechanism has been proven by extensive research. Talking about a goal and actually doing the work to achieve that goal fight for the exact same resources in our brains.
It's a zero-sum game.
Now, visualizing a goal is important in the early stages, but after a certain point, our mind begins to confuse the visualization or the public verbalization with actual tangible progress. Even something as simple as talking aloud to ourselves while trying to solve a complex problem has been shown in studies to decrease insight and limit breakthroughs.
Really? Just talking to yourself?
Yes. When we spend hours explaining our vision, tweeting about our grind, and talking about a monumental task, we essentially trick our neurochemistry into feeling like we've gotten closer to achieving it. We get a premature dopamine hit.
Oh, wow.
Talk depletes us. It completely saps the vital energy we desperately need to conquer the internal resistance and execute the actual work.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second. We hear all the time that sharing your goals publicly is good for accountability. People say, tell your friends you're going to run a marathon, so you actually have to do it. Are we really saying that any kind of talking about your goals is inherently bad?
It is a great question, and it really comes down to the intention behind the talk. There is a difference between telling one trusted mentor to hold you accountable and broadcasting your marathon training schedule to 500 casual acquaintances on Instagram to harvest likes.
Right, the audience matters.
The latter is ego. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard actually warned about this centuries ago. He said that expressing what is still in thought weakens action by forestalling it. Doing genuinely great work is a profound struggle. It is physically draining, it is frequently demoralizing, and it can be terrifyingly lonely.
And we just want to escape that feeling.
Exactly. We talk to fill that void. We talk to soothe the uncertainty. We're assaulted by the silence of the blank page or the empty gym, so we chatter to make that anxiety go away. But the absolute greatest work comes from wrestling with that void, facing it head-on instead of scrambling for the easy, cheap comfort of an audience applauding our mere intentions.
Which is exactly why the alternative presented here is so powerful: silence. Silence isn't a lack of ideas. Silence is a sign of massive internal strength. There is this incredible story in the notes about the legendary multi-sport athlete Bo Jackson.
Such a great example.
When he was playing college football at Auburn, he privately decided he had 2 absolute monumental goals. He was going to win the Heisman Trophy, and he was going to be taken first overall in the NFL draft. Now, think about the ego of a star college athlete. Who do you think he told about these life-changing ambitions? Did he tell the press, his coaches, his teammates?
No one in the locker room knew.
Nobody. He only told his girlfriend. He kept it entirely locked inside his own head. He didn't need the external validation of reporters or friends telling him how great his goals were or how amazing he was going to be.
Because Bo Jackson understood intuitively that silence is the ultimate respite of the confident and the strong. When you keep a massive ambition quiet, it acts like a pressure cooker. All of that energy has nowhere to go except into the work itself. If you vent that pressure through talking, you lose the steam required to drive the engine.
So I want to ask you, the listener, to really reflect on your own daily habits for a second. Think about the last time you faced a massive challenge or decided to start a new diet or a new business project. Did you immediately seek the easy respite of talking about it? Did you tweet about the grind?
Did you buy the domain name instead of writing the code?
Did you spend 3 hours designing a logo for a business that doesn't have a single customer yet? Or did you face the terrifying void of just shutting up and doing the actual unglamorous work? Because as we dig deeper into these historical notes, we see time and time again that the people who actually change the world usually operate in profound, quiet obscurity.
They let the work speak for itself.
Which brings us to a truly phenomenal historical figure that I was completely blown away by. Have you ever heard of a man named John Boyd?
If the listener hasn't heard of him, that is exactly the point. John Boyd was arguably one of the most brilliant and influential strategists and practitioners in the history of modern warfare.
His background is just astounding.
He started out as a highly decorated fighter pilot in the Korean War, and he eventually became the lead instructor at the incredibly elite fighter weapons school at Nellis Air Force Base. Within the military, he was famously known as 42nd Boyd.
Such a cool nickname.
He earned that nickname because he had a standing bet he could start a simulated dogfight from any disadvantageous position against any opponent, and he would completely defeat them in less than 40 seconds. He was a savant of combat.
And he proved it over and over.
He was eventually summoned to the Pentagon, which is where his truly world-changing work began. His complex theories utterly transformed the concept of maneuver warfare. The F-15 and F-16 fighter jets, which fundamentally reinvented modern military aircraft and are still legendary today, were essentially his personal pet projects. He even advised the Secretary of Defense directly on the overarching war plans for Operation Desert Shield.
That resume is unbelievable. He shaped the modern military. But what is so fascinating, and the reason he is central to this discussion on ego, is that despite all of this massive world-altering influence, his actual career path is a total paradox.
It really doesn't make sense on paper.
When you look at his life, he never published any mainstream books to capitalize on his genius.
Yes.
He wrote exactly one academic paper. Despite revolutionizing warfare, he never rose above the rank of colonel in his entire 30 years of service. He lived in a tiny, cramped apartment and was actually known among his peers as the ghetto colonel because of his incredibly frugal lifestyle.
He cared nothing for the trappings of success.
And get this detail, when he died, they found a drawer in his apartment full of completely uncashed expense checks from massive private military contractors. We're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars.
Just sitting in a drawer?
Why did he cash them? Because he views them as subtle bribes, and he refused to be compromised. He retired from the military, fully assuming he would be completely forgotten by history, and reading through his mindset, this wasn't an accident. It was a highly deliberate choice.
It was entirely deliberate, and that philosophy formed the core of a legendary, deeply moving speech he would give to his young protégés. Boyd had this incredible radar for human nature. Whenever he sensed that a young officer was at a critical inflection point in their career, maybe they were feeling ambitious or slightly insecure, or they were desperately wanting to be promoted to the next rank, he would physically pull them aside.
He'd intervene.
He would look them in the eye and tell them that one day, very soon, they would come to a fork in the road of their life, and he would use his hands to physically point in two different directions. He said, if you go that way, you can be somebody. You will have to make compromises. You will have to turn your back on your friends to appease your superiors. But you will join the club, you will get the promotions, you will get the best assignments, and everyone will think you are important.
And then he'd point the other way and say, or you can go that way and you can do something. You might never get promoted again. You certainly won't be a favorite of the bureaucrats and your superiors. But you will never have to compromise your soul. You'll be true to your friends and true to yourself, and the work you do might actually make a real, tangible difference in the world.
To be somebody or to do something.
He told them that life is a constant roll call, and every day you have to decide which way will you go.
It's a profound dichotomy. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of how society operates, Boyd was brilliantly highlighting how bureaucratic systems and our endless pursuit of status actively corrupt our actual values. He had this brilliant, almost theatrical chalkboard exercise he would do with groups of ambitious Air Force officers.
The word replacement exercise.
Yes. He would walk up to the board and write 3 words in huge, bold letters: D, duty, honor, country, the core values of the military. And then he would take an eraser, completely cross those words out, and replace them with 3 entirely different words: pride, power, greed.
Wow, right in front of them.
He was illustrating in real time how the very systems we desperately navigate to get ahead, the endless chase for promotions, the fancy titles, the public recognition, can actually overwrite the things that genuinely matter. The sister replaces our core values with the ego's insatiable desires.
Because appearances are just so deceiving.
Yeah.
We conflate the symbol of success with actual success. Having a position of authority is absolutely not the same thing as being an authority on a subject.
Not at all.
Being promoted doesn't inherently mean you are doing good work, frankly. Corporate bureaucracies are famous for people failing upward just because they look the part. Impressing people at a dinner party is a totally different skill set from being truly impressive in your craft. And I think this is the ultimate challenge for you, listening to this deep dive right now. When you are faced with a major choice in your career, what is your actual driving purpose?
What are you really after?
Are you chasing the title of vice president? Are you chasing the corner office, the reserved parking space, and the specific salary number you can brag about? Are you fundamentally trying to be somebody? Or are you focused on the actual day-to-day work, the mission of the company, and the deep desire to do something meaningful, even if nobody ever knows your name?
Which leads us directly into our next critical concept regarding the aspire phase, and it's one that completely, almost violently, flips a very popular modern cultural narrative right on its head.
I know exactly what you're about to say.
From the time we are in high school, society constantly tells us to find our passion. We are told that passion is the ultimate fuel for success. People spend thousands of dollars going to retreats, reading self-help books, and attending seminars just to discover their passion or rekindle it. But the historical analysis in these notes argues something radically different. Passion, meaning this unbridled enthusiasm, this frantic, highly emotional bundle of energy, is actually the enemy. It can be the very specific thing holding you back from true accomplishment.
Now, I have to be honest, when I first read that, I pushed back hard. Find your passion is the bedrock of modern career advice. How can being enthusiastic about your work be a bad thing?
It sounds so counterintuitive.
But the notes provide some very stark historical examples to illustrate how passion can completely blind us to reality. And we're going to look at these examples strictly through the lens of history and psychology, focusing on the mechanics of human behavior. For instance, the analysis points out that during the lead-up to the war in Iraq, leaders like George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld were incredibly, undeniably passionate about their objective.
Right, and we should explicitly state right here, we are neutrally reporting the author's historical observation.
Absolutely. We aren't endorsing any political stance, just conveying the ideas from the source material. They were deeply fervent believers in what they sought to accomplish. But the observation here is that this overwhelming passion, the certainty of purpose, actually made them incapable of grasping the very real, very grounded objections and logistical concerns raised by those around them. The passion created a tunnel vision.
Exactly. And the research provides other deeply compelling non-political examples to illustrate this exact same psychological blind spot. Take Christopher McCandless, the young man who was the subject of the famous book and movie Into the Wild.
A tragic story.
When McCandless headed into the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness, he was absolutely bursting with passion. He had this romantic, highly emotional vision of shedding society and living off the land. But that immense youthful naivete and blinding passion masked a fatal, catastrophic lack of basic preparation. His passion killed him.
He just didn't have the skills for that environment.
Or look at the British explorer Robert Falcon Scott. He was bitten by what observers at the time literally called pole mania in his passionate, desperate quest to be the first to reach the South Pole. It was an overconfidence and a zealous fervor that caused him to ignore glaring logistical realities and real dangers, and it ended in the tragic death of his entire party. Passion, as it is argued here, is very often a form of mental blunting.
It stops you from thinking clearly.
It masks our fundamental weaknesses and lack of preparation with breathlessness and impetuousness. It makes us feel like we're doing something important just because we feel strongly about it.
So if passion is the enemy, if this frantic emotional state is actually a liability, what is the antidote? What should we be aiming for instead? The notes argue that the antidote is purpose. And the contrast is beautiful. Look at Eleanor Roosevelt.
A powerhouse.
Someone once complimented her during an interview by mentioning her passionate interest in a specific piece of social legislation she was working on. And she gently corrected them. She replied that yes, she deeply supported the cause, but she hardly thought the word passionate applied to her at all. She was a woman of incredible world-shifting influence and power, but she was entirely driven by reason, grace, and steady direction. She wasn't driven by frantic passion. She was driven by cold, clear purpose.
Or consider the world of sports, which we usually associate with immense passion. Look at the legendary UCLA basketball coach John Wooden.
Oh, the Wizard of Westwood?
The man won 10 national collegiate titles in 12 years, a record that will likely never be broken. And one of his most famous, successful players, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, was asked to describe Wooden's coaching style. He used one specific word, dispassionate. Wooden didn't do the frantic, screaming, rah-rah locker room speeches you see in movies.
No chair throwing.
He saw those extra, highly charged emotions as a heavy burden that exhausted his players. He was entirely focused on control, executing your specific job flawlessly, and running a very precise system. He was the exact opposite of passion slave. He was a master of purpose.
The passion paradox is really that passion is form over function. Passion stands on a desk and says, I am so incredibly passionate about this idea. I love it so much. Purpose quietly says, I must do this thing. I was put here to accomplish it, and I am fully willing to endure the agonizing, tedious, unglamorous steps required to get there.
Purpose is focused on the work.
Purpose is realistic. It is methodical. It is almost detached from the emotional high of the end goal. It asks the extremely boring but vital questions. What exactly do we do first? What do we do right now? In the next 5 minutes? How do we objectively measure our progress? So I want you to think about the projects you are working on right now. Are you operating with the blind, frantic zeal of a dog, desperately chasing a squirrel, expending massive amounts of energy, but achieving no actual lasting accomplishment? Or are you operating with the calculated realism, the steady hand, and the clear purpose of a master craftsman?
And if you truly want to become that master craftsman, you have to embrace the mindset of the eternal student. You have to willingly and intentionally place what the notes call an ego ceiling directly over your own head. Because the moment you think you know everything, your growth stops. There is a deeply fascinating story highlighted in the research about this concept, and it comes from a very unlikely place, the world of heavy metal music. It involves the legendary band Metallica.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I loved this anecdote. So we are in the early 1980s. The original members of Metallica are in New York for a crucial recording session. Suddenly, out of nowhere, they decide to fire their lead guitarist, Dave Mustaine. They literally hand him a bus ticket back to California.
Just brutal.
And that exact same afternoon, they hire a young kid in his early 20s named Kirk Hammett. Kirk plays his very first live show with them just a few days later. Now put yourself in his shoes. This is the exact moment Kirk had waited for his entire life. He had just joined a band that everyone in the scene knew was destined for massive, global greatness.
A big break.
He was literally turning professional overnight. His ego could have so easily said, I've arrived. I am a rock star. I'm clearly better than the guy they just fired. Otherwise, they wouldn't have hired me.
But that is exactly what he did not do. Despite having the dream job, and despite already being a highly proficient player, Kirk had the self-awareness to realize he simply wasn't as good as he wanted to be. He realized he lacked a deep, fundamental understanding of musical theory. So what did the brand new lead guitarist of Metallica do? He went out and sought a guitar teacher.
Talk about humility.
He found a man named Joe Satriani, a teacher who was locally notorious for his incredibly harsh, demanding, unforgiving style, and who would later go on to become a legendary virtuoso guitarist in his own right. For the next 2 entire years, while Kirk Hammett was playing in front of increasingly massive, adoring crowds with Metallica, he returned every single week to a small, cramped music shop in Berkeley, California.
He just kept going to lessons.
He went there specifically to receive objective feedback, harsh judgment, and relentless drilling on basic techniques from Satriani.
That is the ultimate power of choosing to be a student. It forces you to submit to a master. You absolutely cannot fake it or bullshit your way past a true teacher. A good teacher will call out your flaws instantly. It aggressively purges the ego out of your system. And the notes expand on this by mentioning Frank Shamrock, the absolute pioneer of mixed martial arts.
The plus-minus-equals system.
Yeah. He developed a specific training system to keep his fighters grounded. He argues that to become truly great at anything, you need a flaw, plus someone who is definitively better than you, who you can learn from and submit to. You need a minus, someone who is lesser than you in skill, whom you can teach, which reinforces your own fundamentals. And you need an equal, someone who is at your exact level to constantly challenge yourself against and keep your competitive edge sharp.
It creates a perfect loop of feedback.
This continuous system ensures you are receiving real, unfiltered feedback from every possible angle, which completely destroys any false illusions your ego might try to build about your own abilities.
The Stoic philosopher Epictetus framed this perfectly thousands of years ago. He said, "It is impossible to learn that which one thinks one already knows. If you are too conceited or too insecure to raise your hand and ask questions, you simply cannot get better."
The ego won't let you.
The human ego absolutely despises harsh feedback. It wants to exist in a protective bubble where it believes it is already a spectacular, fully formed genius. But true, lasting greatness requires long, uncomfortable periods of obscurity, of sitting quietly in a room and wrestling with the reality of your own ignorance. We must consciously choose to become eternal students, no matter how much external success we achieve.
And a massive part of being that eternal student, especially early in your career, is learning how to willingly serve others.
Which brings us to one of my absolute favorite concepts in this entire deep dive, the canvas strategy. It sounds like a business buzzword, but its roots are ancient.
Back to the Roman Empire. In ancient Rome, wealthy businessmen and powerful politicians would routinely patronize artists, writers, and thinkers. But this wasn't free money. In exchange for financial support, the artist had to act as an anti-ambulo, which is a Latin word that literally translates to one who clears the path.
They literally walked in front of them.
They physically walk in front of their wealthy patron through the crowded streets of Rome, clearing the way, communicating messages, running errands, and generally making the patron's life as frictionless as possible.
Now, the research details how the famous Roman epigrammist Martial fulfilled this specific role for years, but he absolutely despised it. He complained about it endlessly in his writings. He felt the role made him a subservient slave.
He felt it was beneath him.
He was incredibly bitter and angry that he, a genius poet, had to serve these rich, intellectually inferior patrons instead of living a life of leisure on a country estate, writing his brilliant thoughts in peace. But his raging ego completely blinded him to the reality of his situation. He couldn't see that being an insider in this elite political system, running these errands and observing these powerful people, gave him the exact raw material and inspiration that made his writing so sharp and caused it to survive for thousands of years. He let his ego turn a massive opportunity into a source of immense misery.
I love that comparison, especially when you contrast Marshall's bitter resentment with the attitude of young Benjamin Franklin. Now, we all acknowledge Franklin was a historical genius, but look at the extreme humility of how he started. When he was a teenager, he desperately wanted to be published. So he wrote these brilliant, highly satirical, deeply popular letters, but he didn't put his name on them.
The Silenced Dogwood letters?
He wrote them under the fake pseudonym Silenced Dogwood. In the dead of night, he would physically slide these letters under the door of the print shop, which just so happened to be owned by his older brother. His brother loved the letters, published them on the absolute front page of the paper, and gladly took all the profit and the immense public credit.
Franklin got nothing.
Franklin got absolutely zero public recognition at the time. His brother was getting rich off his genius. But Franklin wasn't bitter. He was playing an incredibly long game. He was learning exactly how public opinion worked. He was meticulously crafting his wit and testing his material. He was using his brother's established platform as a free canvas to practice his art.
Or, if we look for a more modern equivalent, consider the origin story of Bill Belichick, arguably the most successful coach in NFL history. When Belichick managed to get his very first job in professional football with the Baltimore Colts, it wasn't a glamorous coaching gig. It was an unpaid, uncredited volunteer position.
Just doing the grunt work.
And instead of complaining or trying to pitch grand strategies to the head coach, he eagerly sought out the one specific job that all the other senior coaches absolutely hated doing, analyzing game film. In those days, it was a grueling, tedious, eye-straining process of manually rewinding tape. He did all of this exhausting grunt work, and he handed his brilliant insights and statistical strategies over to the senior coaches.
And they took the credit.
They used his work, and they got the credit. He actively made them look good. He acted as their anti-team below. He cleared the path for them. And by doing so, he learned the incredibly complex game of professional football inside and out from the very ground up, and he did it without threatening anyone else's ego.
That is the absolute core of the canvas strategy. Be lesser, do more. Intentionally find canvases for other people to paint their successes on. Don't worry for a single second about getting the immediate credit. In fact, as the notes suggest, you should be genuinely glad when others take the credit for your hard work early on.
Let them have the spotlight.
Because while they are taking credit on credit, you are quietly compounding and earning interest on the principal. You are building an undeniable skill set. The strategy is simple. Find out what nobody else in the office wants to do and do it cheerfully. find the glaring inefficiencies in the system, and quietly patch them. By clearing the path for the people above you, you make yourself completely indispensable. And ultimately, the person who clears the path controls the actual direction of the path, and they learn everything about how the machine works from the inside.
But I want to pause here and acknowledge something crucial. Employing the canvas strategy, or willingly letting someone else take credit for your brilliant idea, requires an immense, almost superhuman level of internal restraint. And restraint is perhaps the ultimate, most difficult test of the ego.
It really is.
There is no better historical example of this level of restraint than the story of Jackie Robinson. When Branch Rickey, the powerful owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, made the momentous decision to integrate Major League Baseball, he wasn't just looking for a highly talented player. Frankly, there were plenty of incredibly talented black players in the Negro Leagues. But Rickey specifically sat Robinson down and told him, "I'm looking for a ball player with the guts not to fight back."
And that was a massive ask, because Jackie Robinson was actually known as a deeply, fiercely proud, sometimes hot-headed young man. He had a long history of standing up for himself. He had been arrested for arguing with police officers over unfair treatment. While serving in the military, he was nearly court-martialed because he absolutely refused to move to the back of a segregated bus, directly challenging his commanding officer.
He was a fighter.
He had a profound, unshakable sense of justice, and he was always willing to physically and verbally fight for it. So during their initial meeting, Branch Rickey actually play-acted the horrific, vile abuse Robinson would inevitably face: the racial slurs from the crowds, the discriminatory hotels, the physical intimidation from pitchers. And Robinson, understanding the massive stakes, promised he could handle it without reacting.
What's fascinating here is the sheer magnitude of the physical and psychological abuse Robinson voluntarily endured to achieve a massive, world-changing societal goal. During his career, he was intentionally hit by over 72 pitches. Opposing players would literally aim their metal cleats at his Achilles tendon when sliding into bases, trying to permanently end his career. But in 9 agonizing years in the league, he never once hit another player with his fist. He never charged the mound.
His restraint was unbelievable.
But perhaps the most sickening, difficult test of his restraint involved Ben Chapman, the manager of the Philadelphia Phillies. During a game, Chapman stood in the dugout and hurled the most brutal, sustained, vile racial slurs at Robinson while he was trying to bat.
And Robinson wrote extensively about this incident later in his life. He admitted that in that moment, he wanted to drop his bat, march over to that dugout, grab Chapman by the collar, and smash his teeth in, which is entirely 100% understandable. Any human being with a pulse would want to do exactly that.
The instinct is to fight back.
The ego and a righteous sense of justice screamed at him to fight back. But Robinson didn't respond. He stayed in the batter's box. And then, incredibly, the story gets even harder to believe. A month later, Ben Chapman was facing a massive public relations crisis because the press had reported on his horrific behavior. To help save Chapman's job and cool the racial tension surrounding the league, Robinson actually agreed to stand on the field and take a friendly, smiling photograph with the man who had verbally abused him.
Just incredible strength.
He completely subordinated his ego, his deep personal pride, and his immediate justified right to fairness, because he understood the massive bigger picture. He knew that reacting with justified anger would give the critics the exact excuse they needed to destroy the grand experiment of integration. He endured the truly unendurable.
As the author points out in these reflections, those who have successfully subdued their ego understand a profound truth. It does not degrade you when other people treat you poorly. It degrades them. The cruelty reflects their character, not yours. When we are attempting to do something genuinely important in our lives, we will inevitably face slights, dismissals, and outright sabotage from insecure people.
Just part of the process.
Our ego will scream at us to fight back, to send the angry email, to say, "Do you have any idea who I am? I deserve to be treated better than this." But the discipline of the canvas strategy and the long path of true purpose requires us to quietly brush the dirt off our shoulders, continue playing the game, and just keep working.
And what's interesting is that sometimes the hardest, most exhausting battle isn't with external, visible enemies like Ben Chapman. Very often, the hardest battle is the one raging silently inside our own heads. The notes bring up these brilliant literary examples, like the fictional characters Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye, or Arturo Bandini from John Fante's Ask the Dust.
They're their own worst enemies.
These characters are completely paralyzed in life. They can't form real relationships or achieve their goals because they literally cannot get out of their own heads. They are extreme victims of what modern psychologists call the imaginary audience, this overwhelming adolescent belief that everyone in the world is watching your every single move with rapt, judgmental attention.
And if we are honest, we all fall prey to the imaginary audience to some degree. Think about it. We put on our noise-canceling headphones, walk down the street, and literally imagine a cinematic soundtrack to our lives. We mentally play out the opening montage of a movie where we are the brooding, brilliant star, and everyone on the street is an extra marveling at us.
We've all done it.
But this level of constant self-obsession is deeply dangerous when it bleeds into our professional lives. It completely divorces us from objective reality. The notes provide a stark historical contrast from the American Civil War to illustrate this. Look at General George McClellan. On paper, McClellan was the absolute perfect general. He was a brilliant West Point graduate, fiercely loved by his men, and excellent at the logistics of preparing and outfitting an army.
But he couldn't get out of his own way.
He was completely, hopelessly trapped in his own head. He was madly in love with the grand, romantic vision of himself as the ultimate savior of the Union.
And because he was so stuck in his own ego and this imaginary narrative, he completely froze on the battlefield. He was constantly paranoidly convinced that the Confederate enemy was 3 or 4 times larger than they actually were. He imagined massive, complex political conspiracies against him in Washington.
The delays were disastrous.
He spent crucial months doing absolutely nothing, refusing to attack, and all the while he was writing these letters, congratulating himself for heroically saving his army from imaginary defeats. Meanwhile, enemy generals, with a mere fraction of his resources and manpower, ran absolute circles around him. His colossal, suffocating egotism literally cost thousands of American lives because it entirely robbed him of the basic ability to see reality clearly and act decisively.
Now contrast McClellan's paralysis with another Civil War figure, General William Tecumseh Sherman. Sherman was a deeply quiet, unglamorous, fiercely objective realist. Early in the war, recognizing his own limitations, he actually went to President Abraham Lincoln and specifically asked not to be given superior command until he felt he had gained the necessary experience.
Who turns down a promotion like that?
Someone without an inflated ego. Later, he voluntarily waived his own seniority just so he could support Ulysses S. Grant at Fort Donelson. He didn't care a single bit about the newspaper headlines or the historical glory. He only cared about the grim mathematical reality of winning the war. Or look at another military leader mentioned here, General George C. Marshall during World War II.
The diary story.
Marshall flatly, stubbornly refused to keep a personal diary during the war. Why? Because he knew human nature. He knew that the moment he started keeping a diary, he would inevitably start performing for historians. He would start second-guessing his vital, split-second decisions based on how they would look in a book 50 years later, rather than what was strictly necessary to win the war in the present moment. He actively protected his mind from the infectious disease of the imaginary audience.
I think that is one of the most profound takeaways from this entire deep dive. Actively refusing to document your own perceived greatness, just so you don't get intoxicated by the smell of your own exhaust. Which leads us perfectly into our final and perhaps most difficult major hurdle in the aspire phase, the extreme danger of early pride.
Pride comes before the fall.
There is a deeply charming but very pointed story in the notes about a very young 18-year-old Benjamin Franklin. He has just returned to his hometown of Boston after running away to Philadelphia for a few months, and he is incredibly full of himself. He's wearing a fancy new tailored suit, he's carrying a pocket watch, and he's literally jingling a pocket full of silver coins just to impress everyone he meets, especially his older brother.
He wanted to show off.
The reality is he's just a lowly employee in a print shop, but he's strutting around the streets of Boston like he owns the entire world.
The pride is practically radiating off of him. So he goes to visit the highly respected elder statesman of the town, Cotton Mather. After their meeting, they are walking down a dark, narrow hallway in Mather's house. Suddenly, Mather yells out, "Stoop! Stoop!" But young Franklin is too busy posturing, talking a big game, and walking with his chest puffed out, and he smashes his head violently right into a low, unseen ceiling beam. Ouch. Mather looks at him, rubbing his bruised head, and delivers this brilliant piece of advice. "Let this be a caution to you, not always to hold your head so high. Stoop, young man. Stoop as you go through this world, and you'll miss many hard bumps." It is an absolutely perfect, visceral metaphor for the danger of carrying too much pride.
Because pride is fundamentally a deceiver. It is a psychological trick. It takes a very minor, very early accomplishment like getting a good grade or launching a basic website or getting one decent client, and it tricks your brain into feeling like you've achieved a massive, world-altering victory. It blunts the very instrument you desperately need to actually succeed your objective mind.
It makes you complacent.
John D. Rockefeller, who became one of the wealthiest men in human history, understood this danger perfectly. Early in his career, when he first started accumulating a little bit of money and a taste of real success, he was absolutely terrified of becoming arrogant. His own father had been a flamboyant, drunken swindler, so Rockefeller instituted a deeply serious nightly ritual to protect himself.
The self-interrogation.
Before bed, he would talk to himself aloud or write furiously in his diary. He would interrogate his own ego. He would ask himself, are you going to be a fool? You can let this little bit of money puck you up, keep your eyes open, don't lose your balance.
Rockefeller understood that early success is incredibly fragile, and it can spoil a person and completely warp their judgment if they aren't vigilant. Pride makes us think we are incredibly special just because we were chosen for an opportunity, or it convinces us that we are absolute winners just because we happen to currently be in the lead during the first lap of a marathon. The only true, lasting antidote to this delusional pride is pure, unadulterated, grueling work. There is simply no triumph without toil.
I love how the notes illustrate this with a story about the famous French Impressionist painter Edgar Degas. Degas was an undeniably brilliant visual artist, but at one point, he decided he also wanted to write poetry. He felt he had all these beautiful, sweeping, grand ideas for poems, but he eventually grew deeply frustrated and complained to his good friend, the highly accomplished poet Stéphane Mallarmé.
He hit a wall.
The guy said he couldn't write anything good despite being completely full of amazing ideas. And Mallarmé's response is something that cuts right to the absolute bone of what it means to be a creator. He looked at Degas and said, "It's not with ideas, my dear Degas. That one makes verse. It's with the words."
And right there, Mallarmé defined the absolute dividing line between the professional and the amateur. The amateur firmly believes that having the grand idea is the accomplishment in itself. They think the vision is the hard part. The professional, the master craftsman, knows that the idea is absolutely nothing literally worthless without the agonizing, tedious, back-breaking work of actually putting the right words on the page or laying the physical bricks or writing and debugging the lines of code. You absolutely cannot build a lasting reputation on what you are going to do someday.
And doing the work requires a level of stamina that egos simply cannot provide. Look at Bill Clinton. Long before he was the president, long before he had any real political power or national platform, he understood the sheer mechanics of the work. As a young man, he started a massive collection of note cards. He meticulously, obsessively maintained a physical box of 10,000 individual index cards.
That is an insane amount of effort.
On these cards, he wrote down the names, phone numbers, personal details, and specific interests of every single person he met. And every single night, without fail, he would sit down, flip through that massive box, make phone calls, and write personal letters. Or look at the scientist, Charles Darwin. He worked quietly, obsessively, for decades on his deeply controversial theory of evolution, completely refusing to publish a single word of it until the evidence was utterly undeniable. He didn't seek the early applause of his peers. He just sat in his study and did the unglamorous work of observation.
This commitment to the work connects deeply to a brilliant psychological concept formulated by the radio broadcaster Ira Glass, which he calls the taste-talent gap. Glass points out that when you first start out in any creative or ambitious field, you get into it because you have exceptionally great taste. You consume good work, and you know exactly what good work looks and sounds like.
You know the standard.
But for the first few years of your journey, your actual physical talent hasn't caught up to your high-level taste. So you make things, you write an article, you record a podcast, you build a product, and your own killer taste tells you that what you just made is actually a massive disappointment. It doesn't match the vision in your head.
And let's be honest, living inside that gap is purely agonizing.
Yeah.
It is so deeply, profoundly painful to know that your output isn't measuring up to your internal ambition. And that precise moment of pain is exactly where the ego tries to sneak in through the back door. The ego hates that discomfort.
It wants to escape the gap.
So the ego says, just fake it till you make it. Cover up your glaring shortcomings with loud bluster, buy some fake followers, build a massive personal brand on Twitter, and just pretend you are already a fully formed genius. The ego desperately wants to skip the painful, embarrassing phase of being a beginner. But the only real solution, The only actual way to mathematically bridge that taste-talent gap is to put your head down, shut your mouth, and work until your hands bleed. You have to willingly endure writing the crappy first drafts. You have to endure the incredibly lonely hours of practice in the empty gym when absolutely no one is watching and no one is cheering for you.
As the great basketball player and politician Bill Bradley used to constantly remind himself during his grueling training sessions, when you are not practicing, remember, someone somewhere is practicing, and when you meet him, he will win. Work is the ultimate exercise in delaying gratification. It is passing the adult version of the marshmallow test every single day. We must actively kill our early pride, willingly embrace the intense humility of the eternal student, and trade our grand, highly passionate public talk for quiet, steady, purposeful action.
Which brings us finally to the precipice of the mountain. Let's briefly summarize the incredible, challenging journey we've been on during this deep dive. We've learned that constantly talking about our goals actively saps the psychological energy we desperately need to achieve them. We have looked at John Boyd and chosen the difficult path of doing something over the easy path of being somebody.
We rejected the passion myth.
We have actively rejected the cultural myth of frantic passion in favor of calm, methodical purpose. We have submitted to the uncomfortable ego ceiling of being an eternal student, and we've learned how to employ the Canvas strategy to clear the path for others and make ourselves truly indispensable. We have practiced the unbelievable restraint of Jackie Robinson, actively ignored the blinding spotlight of the imaginary audience, and we've killed our early pride with relentless, unglamorous, agonizing work. But the ultimate question remains, what happens when you do all of that and you actually win?
What comes next?
What happens when you finally reach the mountaintop you've been aspiring to?
That is where the environment fundamentally changes. The air gets very thin at the top, and the terrain becomes incredibly unforgiving. Because success brings entirely new, highly sophisticated temptations for the ego. The notes we are exploring tease this inevitable next phase with a very stark, unsettling warning. It mentions the sudden, tragic death of Howard Hughes Sr., the incredibly wealthy tool magnate who died of a massive sudden heart attack right in the middle of a business meeting.
And left everything to his son.
He unexpectedly left his immense, sprawling fortune and empire to his young son, Howard Hughes Jr. And the ensuing life of Howard Hughes Jr., the massive, suffocating fame, the wildly reckless spending, the terrifying public descent into absolute paranoia and madness serves as a brutal masterclass in how success, if achieved without absolute sobriety and a bedrock of purpose, can quickly become the absolute worst thing that ever happens to you.
It is a terrifying thought. We will absolutely have to tackle the success and failure phases in a future deep dive because navigating the very top of the mountain and surviving the inevitable fall from it is a whole different beast entirely.
It's going to be a fascinating follow-up.
But for now, as we wrap up our intensive focus on the aspire phase, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, highly personal thought to mull over. So what does this all mean for you in your life right now? We all have aspirations. We all have that quiet, persistent voice in our head telling us a highly curated story about our own specialness, our own unique, undeniable destiny. If ego truly is the fundamental enemy of your current aspirations, what specific, comforting story are you telling yourself right now simply to avoid doing the hard, boring work? What uncomfortable truth about your own lack of skill are you actively hiding from behind a wall of passion and public talk? Imagine what you could actually accomplish tomorrow morning if you woke up, decided to completely drop that fictional story, closed your mouth, ignored the imaginary audience, and simply did the work. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into these incredible notes. We'll see you next time.